articles. Sorry, yeah. In the past week, I tried to find some important editorials in the Hindu, but I didn't find much of the articles what you used to have. But I have this time. I have taken few articles from different newspaper, Indian Express, Mint, and the Hindu as well. So we'll discuss all such important editorials. So first editorial of the day, that is about shift in the Earth's axis. What new research says about climate change causing a shift in Earth's axis? So this article basically it is relevant for GS3 under environment section regarding climate change, and your geography one, GS paper one geography. So here what you need to understand, if I say about geography, so in geography the shift in Earth's axis, but here this article says that researchers, they have found in a research that because of climate change, a shift in Earth's axis has been found. Okay, so here it means moreover this article is about climate change, okay, and impact of climate change on Earth. Okay, so that is why shift in Earth's axis has been found. So what is it is all about? So context is that's because of rising sea level, heat waves, melting glaciers, and storms. So these are some of the well-known consequences of climate change. And new research has also added another impact of this shift the axis along with the Earth rotates. It means, what is axis? Basically, Earth is in the rotation. Okay, it is not static. It always rotates. So whenever it rotates, rotates on an axis. So this axis basically, whenever Earth rotates, so a shift in the axis has been found. So study published by Geophysical Research Letters of the American Geophysical Study, it says that because of in melting of glaciers, because of global temperature rise, our planet's axis of rotation has been moving more than usual since 1990s. It is not much past, but very recent past, you can say from 1990s, or it is somewhere 20 years when we are seeing this. Okay, as per the research published in Geophysical Research Letters of American Geophysical Union. So, what reason they have given? They have given because of significant melting of glaciers and because of global temperature rise. So, temperature and melting of glaciers, so these are interrelated. Related. So, because of that, what they have found, a shift in the Earth axis they have found. So, while this change is not expected to affect daily life, it can change the length of the day by a few milliseconds, experts says. So here, what you need to understand, if we say about rotation evolution, so rotation of Earth is all about that it impacts a day, the length of the day. Okay, so whenever Earth is rotating, it is rotating on its axis, and it comes a 24-hour circle while it is rotating. So what impact rotation gives? Basically, whenever Earth rotates, it impacts our diurnal day. Okay, so it means the length of the day, the daytime, the nighttime. So it is impacting daytime, or you can say length of day. Okay, and whenever Earth revolves, okay, so it is whenever it is revolving in an orbit, because of revolution of Earth, it completes one revolution in 365 days. Okay, so it means changes takes place revolving. Okay, so Earth is in the continuous revolution. Earth is in the continuous rotation. The rotation is 24 hours long, and because of rise level, because of global temperature rise, this shift in rotation is taking, that is the length of day has increased. And which some changes have shift in Earth's axis. Earth's axis are I'm sorry, I lost my network connection in between. Sorry for this interruption. So shift in Earth's axis, I was discussing that it has been found. So Earth's axis of rotation, that is a line along which it is spinning around itself as it revolves around the sun. So when Earth is spinning on one particular line, okay, on its own line, so that is what it means. What it is, the axis on which it is rotating, and when it is revolving around the sun, it means it is revolving. So in revolution, in one revolution, some seasonal changes we would see, from summer to monsoon, then monsoon to winter, then winter to spring, or then summer. So this revolution is around the sun, or revolving around the sun, and rotation, it means changes in day and night. So point on which axis intersects the planet's surface are the geographical north and south poles. Location of the poles, it is not fixed. And if you know that Earth is divided into different latitudes, and these latitudes are basically imaginary lines. So when we mark poles, so pole is not basically fixed. Okay. So location of the poles is not fixed, and axis moves because of changes in how the Earth's mass is distributed around the planet. Poles move when axis moves, and movement is called polar motion. So whenever this movement in polar section sees, so this means what? This means movement in the polar motion. So as per NASA, data from 20th century shows that spin axis drifted about 10 centimeters per year. It means over a century, polar motion has exceeded 10 meters. So generally, polar motion is caused by changes in hydrosphere, atmosphere, oceans, or solid Earth. But now, what is the reason? The reason behind this is climate change. Okay, so it has added to the degree with which these poles are wandering. Okay, so basically, if changes in the polar has been seen, or polar motion had been seen, so that was because of hydrosphere. It means because of water level or water body, because of atmosphere, the wind movement, or the atmosphere of the Earth, or you can say this year, and oceans. Okay, so this year or this time it has been found because of climate change, this change had been seen. So as per the new study, since 1990s, climate change has caused billions of tons of glacial ice to melt into oceans, and this has caused Earth's pole to move in the new direction. And as per the study, North Pole has shifted in a new eastward direction since 1990s. And because of changes in the hydrosphere, it means the way in which water is stored on the Earth. Hydrosphere means what? It means the way changes in the water taking place. Okay. So from 1995 to 2022, average speed of drift was 17 times faster than it was found between 1981 to 1995. And in the last 4 decades, poles move about 4 meters in the distance. So this time pole has shifted towards eastern side. So calculations were based on satellite data from NASA's Gravity Recovery and Climate Experiment, that is GRACE. So mission, and as well as estimates of glacier loss in groundwater pumping going back to the 1980s, what scientists, experts had been said. So faster ice melting under global warming was the most likely cause of directional change of the polar drift in the 1990s. Other possible causes are terrestrial water storage. It means change in the non-glacial regions because of climate change, and unsustainable consumption of groundwater for irrigation and other anthropogenic activities. It means whatever activities we are involved, we humans are involved in regarding water, how we are using our water for consumption, how we are using our water for irrigation, how we are exploiting our groundwater recharge. So this is impacting our earth structure internally, and these changes are being occurring. So these are some possible causes. So these are called what? Terrestrial water storage, and these changes are occurring in the non-glacial regions. Okay, it means in the non-Himalayan regions. So climate change is the only reason behind this. While ice melting is the major factor behind increased polar motion, ground depletion also adds to the phenomenon. As millions of tons of water from below the land is pumped out every year for drinking, industries, or agriculture, most of it's eventually joining the sea. So it is what it is doing basically, it is redistributing the mass of the planet. Okay, it means the water what we are using and wasting, it is going into the sea, and because of that also the level of sea is increasing, and this is occurring a change in the poles. So poleward movement or pole motion has been seen, and this pole movement has been seen shifted towards eastern side. Okay, so this is all about this article. Now, next article is about a transient high. Record GST inflows are heartening, but major risks are lying ahead. So this article is about during pandemic, the collection of GST revenue, it was found very high. Okay, so that is why it has said record GST inflows are heartening, but major risks lies ahead. So these risks, they are talking about economic, okay, economic risk because of pandemic. The context is that India's GST regime could not have hoped for a better start to its fifth year. Revenues from tax hit an all-time high for rupees 1,41,384 crore in the month of April, surpassing the previous month's record of about 24 lakh crore. It means in the last month, 1.24 lakh crore was the collection of GST, and this year it is 1.41 lakh crore. So this is very surprising. It was found surprising because of pandemic. Situation of economy is not so good. That is why economic risk they have talked about raised or high. So a revenue hit, it means the revenue has increased. Okay, so what is the meaning of this? Just a second. So, after a disastrous period for the economy following last year's national lockdown, GST revenue hit somewhere 1.05 lakh crore in October, and it was shown a steady uptick since then, in the tandem with hopes of a sustained recovery. So, April's numbers, which are essentially driven by the transactions in March that were bolstered by heightening economic activity. So, because of economic activities or after pandemic, or not after pandemic, but when pandemic was on its low pace, so then economic activities gets opened, banks started lending their money in the market, so people started they resumed their work or they resumed their economic activities. So what happens, they were in the position to pay back. Okay, so to pay their GST. So it helped to increase the revenue. So specter of rising COVID-19 cases and the fear of an impending lockdown could also have driven people to make advance purchases in anticipation. So when COVID on its surge, and you can say the second wave on its surge, so in the fear of lockdown, what people thought? People thought to buy and store the products or the commodities for their consumption. So because of that, they started spending much. Okay, and it ultimately helped the economy. So firms in the process of closing annual accounts may have remitted higher GST based on audit advice, and while a gradual tightening of the compliance regime and proactive coordinated probes against taxpayers using fake bills to evade liabilities that have played no small part. In April 2020, GST collections had dipped to mere 32,172 crore after all activities ground to a halt at 4 hours notice in late March. Economic activity may not yet be as badly affected amidst the pandemic's second wave. So economic activities till now it has not impacted, but risk is lying. So so far, going by restrictions imposed in several states, supply chain disruptions are not expected to be as challenging as it was earlier. So weakening demand will trigger a recalibration of production and investment plans, and some of which had begun to kick in. Consider some indicators like major two-wheeler producers. They saw sales plummet by around a third in April compared to March. And plants have shut down gradually, and they begin to reduce inventory buildups. In a report called Wall of Worry, CRISIL has warned of several indicators which is sliding since mid-April, and that includes GST e-way bills, which fell by over 6% 2 weeks in a row. It means because second wave was on its surge, it was in line. So what people started doing, they started shutting down gradually, and gradually they became to reduce inventory buildups. So that burden on them, or economic burden on them, should not get raised. So as per wall of worry by CRISIL, so they have warned of several indicators which has slided since mid-April, which includes GST e-way bill. So GST e-way bill, basically it is required whenever goods are moving from one state to another state. So for that, e-way bill is required, which is earlier it was applicable for 24 hours. So within 24 hours, goods have to cross the border. So I think now as well it is 24 hours long. So that fell by over 6%. Okay, so manufacturing orders growth hit an 8-month low in April, and that was said by IHS Market. And the pandemic surge and desperate shortage of health infrastructure, this has also prompted industry leaders to pitch for a stringent lockdown. That would be foolhardy, and to expect GST and other tax revenues to stay robust till the government gets a better grip on infections and vaccination. So whenever vaccination will not cover the entire population or as much as population, or when government would not control this infection, then economic risk would be continued. So we cannot rely on this collection. So with the assembly polls over, center must urgently convene the GST Council to add to what is already pending. Rationalization of GST rate slabs, a rejig of rates on critical pandemic supplies, and prickly issue of bringing fuel under GST. This means these are some of the issues which GST Council need to meet and resolve. Okay, so people are saying that fuel should also come under GST because it is very expensive right now. So if it will put under GST, then all the states would have universal rate for the petroleum or the fuel products. So here these three things are there: rationalization of GST rate slabs. So rationalized rate slabs should be there, and rejig of rates on critical pandemic supplies, and prickly issue of bringing fuel under GST. So council must begin gearing up early for shortfalls in GST compensation to states that may arise this year. And India can ill afford a repeat of the 2020 face-off between the center and the states, which almost upended the very spirit of cooperative federalism the GST emerged from. So GST, basically, what is the idea behind? Idea is to promote or to foster cooperative federalism. It means states would cooperate with each other under GST regime. So India can ill afford a repeat of 2020, when during 2020 the economic contraction had been found. In the first quarter, it was minus 23.9%. In the second quarter, it was minus 7.5%. So that should not get repeated. So this face-off between center and states, that almost appended the very spirit of cooperative federalism in the GST regime. Okay, so because of contraction, GST collection was also very low. It was found very low. So what GST Council said, GST Council, basically it distributes the GST collection between center and states. So when council found that collection was not so much, so central government or finance minister, it declined to share the compensation to the states in the name of what was the term they used? There was a term. I'm forgetting the term, force majeure. Okay, force majeure. Force majeure was the term, and it was said because of act of God in the name of pandemic. So when pandemic came, so it was named as act of God by finance minister, and because of this, our center is not able to distribute compensation to the states, which had been decided when GST was established. Okay, so it was said that, so because of that, what happened? Collection was not distributed, but this time it is very much, and it will be distributed. So it is fostering cooperative federalism between center and between states and states. Okay. Now, next article. a One Health approach that targets people, animals. It means One Health should be there, which should affect people as well as animal, because whenever we talk about any virus, it is not required that it will impact only people, it may also impact animals. So we can make people persuade, or we can persuade people to follow public behavior, okay, so social distancing, wearing masks. So if any disease that would be zoonotic in nature, it means that may spread from animal to human, animal to animal. So we cannot control that. Okay, that will be very disastrous. So here this article is talking about One Health approach should be there, which should be feasible and available for people as well as animals. So battle against COVID-19 should also be used as an opportunity to meet India's One Health targets. So here the idea of this article is about universalization of health facility. It means One Health for all. So context is that the father of modern pathology, Rudolf Virchow, emphasized in 1856 that there are essentially no dividing lines between animals and human vaccine medicine. This concept is ever more salient as the world continues to grapple with the COVID-19 pandemic. Discussions that took place around World Veterinary Day on 24th April 2021 focused on acknowledging the interconnectedness of animals, humans, and the environment, an approach referred to as One Health. Okay. So zoonotics, that remains a threat. What is that about? Studies indicates that more than two-thirds of existing and emerging infectious diseases are zoonotic in nature, or can be transferred between animals and humans, or vice versa. So when pathogen in question originates in any life form but circumvents the species barrier. So another category of disease, that is anthropozoonotic infections that transferred from humans to animals. Okay, so whenever from human to animals it will transfer, the infection will transfer, it will called anthropozoonotic. And whenever it is zoonotic, it means it is or it can be transferable from animal to animal, animal to human. So transboundary impact of viral outbreaks in recent years, like Nipah virus, Ebola virus, severe acute respiratory syndrome, which we in short form we call SARS, Middle East respiratory syndrome, it means MERS, and avian influenza. These are further reinforce the need for us to consistently document the linkage between the environment, animal, and human health. It means because of human actions, because of environmental problem, what is happening? Any disease which is surrounding, okay, which is in the surrounding, it means it is impacting environment. It means animal and human both becomes carriers. Okay, so from animal to animal, animal to human, human to human. So this kind of chain, it gets continued. So India's framework on health, what is it all about? So India's One Health vision drives its blueprint from agreement between the tripartite plus alliance, which comprising the Food and Agriculture Organization and of the United Nations, the World Organizations for Animal Health, the World Health Organization, and United Nations Environment Program. So this would be a global initiative support by the United Nations Children Fund and World Bank under the overarching goal of contributing to One World, One Health. It means universalization of health would be there. So in keeping with the long-term objectives, India established a national standing committee on zoonosis as far back as 1980s. After this year, funds were sanctioned for setting up a Center for One Health at Nagpur. Further, Department of Animal Husbandry and Dairying that has launched several schemes to mitigate the prevalence of animal diseases since 2015 with a funding pattern along the lines of 60-40. It means center would provide 60% of funding and states would provide 40% of the funding. And this will be for the general states or generalized states. For northeastern states, it will be 90-10, center 90, and 10 would be states. And 100% funding would be given for the union territories. So under the National Animal Disease Control Program, rupees 13,000 plus crores that have been sanctioned for the foot and mouth disease and brucellosis control. Additionally, DAHD, that is Department of Animal Husbandry and Dairying, they will soon establish one health unit within the ministry. So additionally, government is working to revamp programs which is focusing on capacity building for veterinarians and upgrading the animal health diagnostic systems like assistance to states for the control of animal diseases. In the revised component of assistance to states or union territories or UTs, there is increased focus on vaccination against livestock diseases and backyard poultry. So we have seen many of the zoonotic diseases, for example, bird flu, okay, or any infections which is prone to what's say animal diseases. So to this end, assistance will be extended to state biological production units and disease diagnostic laboratories. WHO estimates that rabies, that is also a zoonotic disease, so that will cause the global, considering that 97%, just a second, that attributed to dogs, inventions for disease management in dogs are considered crucially. Department of Animal Husbandry and Dairying, they have partnered with Ministry of Health and Family Welfare in the National Action Plan for eliminating dog-mediated rabies. This initiative is geared towards sustained mass dog vaccination of rabies. So this is what, this is a combined approach towards it. So One Health vision, if we talk about, so scientists have observed that there are more than 1.7 million viruses which is circulating in the wildlife, and many of them are likely to be zoonotic in nature, which is implying that unless there is timely detection, India risks facing many more pandemics in time to come. It means unless the time when we control these zoonotic diseases, we are open or we are prone to get many infections like, okay, like this. So to achieve targets under One Health vision, efforts are ongoing to address the challenges which is pertaining to veterinary manpower shortages, lack of information sharing between human and animal health institutions, and inadequate coordination on food safety at slaughter, distribution, and retail facilities. Basically, what happens at the meat shops or whenever butcher or slaughtering shops are there. So these are also the places where many livestock diseases or infections can spread from there, okay, in the environment. So these issues can be remedied by consolidating existing animal health and disease surveillance system, for example, information network for animal productivity and health, national animal diseases reporting system, which developing best practice guidelines for informal market and slaughterhouse operations, like inspections of these places, disease prevalence assessments, and creating mechanisms to operationalize One Health at every stage down to the village level. So now, as we battle yet another wave of deadly zoonotic disease, that is COVID-19, because it has been said that COVID-19 can be spread from animal to human or human to animal. So awareness generation and increased investments towards meeting One Health target is the need of the hour. It means we need to formulate this plan, or we need to come up with this framework that One Health vision can be successfully led down, so that zoonotic diseases can be curbed, or anthropozoonotic diseases can be curbed. Okay, so this is all about this article. Recently, Prime Minister of India and Boris Johnson, they met virtually. So this article is about, could Modi Johnson meet provide unsteady Indo-Britain ties? Okay, so here they have termed Indo-Britain tied as unsteady. So here is their meeting is going to provide a stability or steadiness or improvement in their ties. So context is that as Delhi and London break the corona zincs on the long scheduled summit between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Boris Johnson, with a digital conversation scheduled on Tuesday last week, cooperation on taming the pandemic is inevitably at the top of the agenda. So like India today, Britain had gone through a horrendous COVID-19 crisis some months ago, and there is much for the two leaders to talk about it. It means India can take idea how UK or Britain had control the spread of the disease or spread of the infection. So it can take help from there. So cooperation in the health sector, they have talked about beyond the immediate relief supplies of oxygen and other medical equipment needed to treat COVID victims. India and United Kingdom must tap into the enormous potential for bilateral strategic cooperation in the health sector and contributions to the global war on the virus. So issue of resilient medical supply chains is expected to figure not only in the bilateral conversation between both of them, but also the group of 7 ministerial meeting in the London this week. So this week, G7 countries meeting is going on 8th of May. It had started. So foreign ministers of India, Japan, and Australia, they would also join this meeting to set the stage for the group of 7+3. So it was in the discussion that group of 7 can be extended and it can make group of 7+3. So Japan, India, and Australia, that might be your prelims question. So India, Japan, and Australia are the members who are termed as G7+3. So this physical summit next month hosted by British Prime Minister. So possibilities range from ramping up vaccine production to the structuring of a strong public health system in India, absence of which has been so terribly felt in the last few weeks because of shortage of vaccines in the country, because India cannot freely manufacture vaccines because of licenses, okay, because of intellectual property rights had been imposed on that. So because of that, India is not able to freely manufacture vaccines. India had to be dependent on the countries for the raw materials. So that was felt, okay, in the past few weeks. So first, nor will be the last. So even as it overcomes the current COVID wave, Delhi must secure the opportunities to work with its international partners in overcoming India's failings that have been so mercilessly exposed in the last few weeks. Britain and G7 countries, they are well positioned in the help transform India's internal capabilities as well as benefit from them in the management of future global pandemics. So when health sector will necessarily dominate the conversation between Prime Minister and Boris Johnson, there is other bilateral business that had been pending for too long. Few Western powers, they are deeply connected to India and Britain. And it means as compared to Britain, they are deeply connected with India. Okay. So yet building a sustainable partnership with Britain has been rather hard. And India's relations, if we see with countries as different as US and France, have dramatically improved in recent years. Ties with Britain have lagged somewhere. Okay, it means India and Britain need to improve their tide. So one reason for this failure had been the colonial prism that has distorted mutual perceptions. It means Britain was the country which had colonized us, not only us, but most of the Asian and African countries. So this has become one of the reasons behind a lagged relationship between India and Britain. So if anti-colonial resentment against Britain is always seething barely below the surface among the Indian political and bureaucratic classes, London has found it difficult to shed its own prejudices about India. It means India need to break it off. India need to vanish it off the the colonial prism. Okay, so better legacies of the partition and Britain's perceived tilt to Pakistan have long complicated the engagement between Delhi and London. So it was found that Britain has more tilted towards Pakistan now. So it also make difficult for India to improve its ties with Britain. So what is new in the relationship is the strong political will on the part of Modi and Boris Johnson to find a fresh basis for the bilateral relationship. The two leaders, they are expected to announce a 10-year roadmap to transform the bilateral relationship that will cover a range of areas. So both of them, Prime Minister and Boris Johnson, they are confronting a whole new set of circumstances for their countries. And they are recognizing that India and Britain need each other to achieve their larger goals. So on trade, Both are on the rebound from their respective regional blocs, and Britain has walked out of European Union. As we know, Brexit it is the term has given to them, and India has refused to join the China-centered Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, that is RCEP. So both will continue to trade with their regional partners, and they are eager to build new global economic partnership. It means on the trade front, both of them have capabilities to establish a good trade relationship. So while remaining a security actor in Europe, Britain is tilting to the Indo-Pacific, where India is a natural ally. And Delhi, which is looking at a neighborhood that has been transformed by the rise of China, needs as a wide a coalition as possible to restore a semblance of regional balance. It means India is also looking for a partner in the Indo-Pacific who can counter China along with other countries. So Britain could also contribute to the strengthening of India's domestic defense industrial base, and the two sides could also expand Delhi's regional reach through sharing of logistical facilities. It means India and Britain can also establish logistical, or they can sign the logistic agreement. Okay, so both of them can provide or can share logistical facilities. So Delhi and London, they are said to be exploring an agreement on migration and mobility to facilitate the legal movement of Indians into Britain. And both the sides are committed to finding common ground on climate change as they deepen their bilateral partnership and expand regional and international cooperation. So Delhi and London may find it easier to manage the irritations over Pakistan and South Asian diaspora politics in Britain. So both of them need to sort all such problems, whether it is trade related, whether it is health related, whether it is diplomatic related. Okay. Moving on to the next article, that is about COVID-19. So COVID-19, it has been said that it has become a blot. Just a second. Yeah, so that has become a blot on India's foreign policy canvas. A direct consequence of the pandemic is that New Delhi's claim to regional primacy and leadership could take a hit. So, context is that the second wave of COVID 19 and its agonizing consequences that has prompted the country to accept foreign aid after a gap of 17 years. And it is bound to have far reaching strategic implications for India. So while the world realizes that India is too important to ignore, which perhaps explains the rush to help, there is little doubt that country will not be the toast of the Western world until it is able to get back on its feet. So, as a direct consequence of the pandemic, India's claim to regional primacy and leadership will take a major hit. Its leading power aspirations will be dented and accentuate its domestic political contestations. So these in turn will impact the content and conduct of India's foreign policy in the years to come. So COVID-19 has given an opportunity, or you can say, not an opportunity, but a blot on India's foreign policy canvas. Okay, it means India's foreign policy somewhere is being disturbing because of COVID-19. So direct consequence of the pandemic is what? Is on India's claim to regional primacy and leadership of India in the regional politics. So India's traditional primacy, what it should be. So COVID 2.0 has quickened the demise of India's regional primacy. And regrettably, the country's geopolitical decline is likely to begin in the neighborhood itself. That is a strategic space which New Delhi has been forced to cede to Beijing over the past decade or so, a phenomenon that was intensified by the aggressive regional policies of Modi 1.0. Okay, it means the geopolitical decline had been found. Okay, it was because of neighborhood. So geopolitical decline, it was seen because of neighborhood and the strategic pace where India was forced to cede to China over the past decade. So this phenomena was intensified by aggression of the regional policies of Modi's first regime. So India's traditional primacy in the region was built on a mix of material aid, political influence, and historical ties. Its political political influence is steadily declining. Its ability to materially help the neighborhood will shrink in the wake of COVID 19, and its historical ties alone may not do wonders to hold on to a regional hungry for development assistance and political autonomy. So, So, as a result, South Asian states they are likely to board the Chinese bandwagon, and if they have not been already. So, COVID 19 therefore comes at a time when India's standing in the region is already shrinking. That is, the pandemic will unfortunately quicken the inevitable. In July 2015, External Affairs Minister, who was then Foreign Secretary, stated, it means that then the present Foreign Minister used to be Foreign Secretary then in 2015. So he stated that India aspires to be a leading power rather than just a balancing power. It means India wanted to emerge as a leader. So, how will COVID 19 impact India's great power or leading power aspirations? Being boxed in a China dominated region will provide India with a little space to pursue its regional, let alone global, geopolitical ambitions, except in the Indo Pacific region. So, here the writer wants to say that because of COVID 19, what is happening? India is not emerging as a regional leader. Okay, so how India would emerge as a leader or leading power? So, so India is being boxed in the China-dominated region. So here, it has got little space to pursue its regional or regional power. Okay, not the global power. So or global ambition, except in the Indo-Pacific region. It means in Indo-Pacific region, along with other countries like Quad countries, India is trying to show its power in the Indo-Pacific region. So not in Asia, not in global politics. India is able to show its power or leading aspirations. So while Indo-Pacific is a geopolitically keen and ready to engage with India, pandemic could adversely impact India's ability and desire to contribute to Indo-Pacific and the Quad. COVID-19 will prevent any ambitious military spending or modernization plans like we call for in the wake of standoff in the line of actual control, and the limit of countries' attention on global diplomacy and regional geopolitics, like if it be Afghanistan or Sri Lanka or Indo-Pacific. So, with reduced military spending and lesser diplomatic attention to regional geopolitics, India's ability to project power and contribute to the growth of the Quad will be uncertain. And while the outpouring of global aid to India shows that world realizes India is too important to fail, the international community might also reach the conclusion that post COVID 19 India is too fragile to lead and be a leading power. So, India is pivotal to the Indo Pacific project. But with India's inability to take a lead role and China wooing smaller states in the region away from the Indo Pacific with aid and threats, the Indo Pacific balance of power could eventually turn in Beijing's favor. So, here in the end, what it is trying to say, the writer trying to say that India is only limited to Indo-Pacific, okay, in the Indo-Pacific region, and India's ability to take a lead role. And China is wooing smaller states, the neighboring states or the Asian smaller states in the region, which is away from the Indo-Pacific. So, so how China is doing it? China is doing it with the aid. It is providing aid to the smaller states. Then it is threatening them as well regarding debt trap. Okay, so in that situation, what is emerging? It emerging that Indo-Pacific balance of power could eventually turn in the Beijing's favor, not in the India's favor. So how India will aspire to become leader? So domestic politics, if we talk about, so domestic political contestations in the wake of COVID-19 devastation in the country could also limit India's strategic ambitions, and general economic distress, a fall in foreign direct investment and industrial production, and rise in unemployment have already lowered the mood in the country. Central political leadership, that is likely to focus on COVID-19 recovery and the assembly elections in Uttar Pradesh in 2022. UP election and the run-up to the 2024 general election both are crucial for Modi regime that could fan communal tensions in the country or trigger more political violence. A depressed economy, politically volatile domestic space combined with a lack of elite consensus on strategic matters would hardly inspire confidence in the international system about India. Domestic political preoccupations will further shrink the political elite's appetite for foreign policy innovation or initiatives. Post COVID 19, Indian foreign policy is therefore likely to be a holding operation. These strategic consequences of the pandemic will shape the content and conduct of India's foreign policy in several important ways. Now, what is move towards China? So one potential impact of COVID-19's devastating return and the damage it has done would be that India its reluctancy towards it. So, from competing with China's vaccine diplomacy a few months ago, India today is forced to seek help from the international community. So, if not China, to deal with the worsening COVID-19 situation at home. So, for one, China has compared to most other countries and emerged stronger in the wake of the pandemic. Secondly, world notwithstanding is its anti-China countries or anti-China rhetoric, it will continue to do business with China, and it has already been and will only increase. Thirdly, while one is yet unsure of the nature of China-US relations in the days ahead, the rise of China and India's COVID-19 related troubles could prompt Washington to hedge its bets on Beijing. It means because of COVID-19, what would happen? USA might tilt towards China. Okay. So finally claims that India could compete with China as a global investment and manufacturing destination would remain just that claims. Thanks to the monumental mismanagement of the second wave, India's ability to stand up to China stands vastly diminished today in the material power, in terms of balance of power consideration, and political will. So, this might require New Delhi to be more conciliatory towards China. If the government's rather muted response to the LAC standoff in the summer of 2020 is anything to go by, we are likely to see a conciliatory China policy from here on. So, what is India's foreign policy all about? So, post COVID-19, Indian foreign policy is unlikely to be business as usual. And given the much reduced political capital within the Modi government to pursue ambitious foreign policy goals, the diplomatic bandwidth for expansive foreign policy goals would be limited and leading thereby to a much depressed Indian foreign policy. The remainder of the Mr. Modi's current term, it means the left out term, that is unlikely to emerge unscathed from the acute foreign policy depression. This might take the aggressive edge off of India's foreign policy under Prime Minister. Less aggression could potentially translate into more accommodation, reconciliation, and cooperation, especially in the neighborhood with Pakistan on the one hand, and within the broader like South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation framework on the other hand. It means if lesser aggression would be shown by India, then what can be happen? India can improve its ties with Pakistan. And in the broader terms, we can say that India can improve its ties with SARC, okay, or it can reform SARC. So aftermath of the pandemic may kindle such a conciliatory tone in India's foreign policy for other reasons as well. For one, COVID-19 has focused us to reimagine to some extent at least the friend enemy equations in the global geopolitics. With the US seemed hesitant, at least initially, to assist India even as the pandemic was wreaking havoc in the country, Moscow was quick to come to New Delhi's aid. And even though New Delhi did not accept the aid offers from Pakistan and China, it means Pakistan and China also has offered aid to India. So India has accepted the aid from Russia. So if India accepts the aid offers from Pakistan and China, these offers sounded more than the unusual or usual diplomatic grandstanding that states engage in during natural calamities. The argument here is not that these will lead to fundamental shifts in India's strategic partnership, but they could definitely moderate the sharp edges of India's pre-existing geopolitical articulation. It means this may change its foreign policy. So strategic autonomy, if we talk about, so finally pandemic would at the very last indirectly it may impact India's policy of maintaining strategic autonomy. So as pointed out above, strategic consequences of the pandemic are bound to shape and structure New Delhi's foreign policy choices as well as constrain India's foreign policy agency. So structure and to external criticism. For after all, India cannot say yes to just aid and no to criticism. So post COVID-19, India might find it harder to resist demands of a closer military relationship with the US. And India, every crisis opens up the possibility for change and new thinking. So what COVID-19 will also do is open up new regional opportunities for cooperation, especially under the ambit of SARC, which is an initiative that already saw some small beginnings during the first wave of the pandemic. So, India might do well to get the region's collective focus on the regional health multilateralism to promote mutual assistance and joint action on health emergencies, and classical geopolitics should be brought on a par with healthy diplomacy, environmental concerns, and regional connectivity in South Asia. So, COVID 19 may have opened precisely such an opportunity to the world's least integrated region. Okay. Next article, that is an issue of lives versus livelihoods. That the situations faced by India's migrants are not a matter of concern in policy making. It is quite apparent. Okay, so here again, at the when India is facing second wave or surge of second wave of COVID-19. So in this situation as well, the migrants, okay, or migrant laborers or urban migrant laborers, their life has become vulnerable. Okay, so this article is about uh, 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 lives versus livelihoods. So context is that strict to moderate lockdowns are being imposed again, and this time in April 2021, terminating jobs in many an establishment employing large numbers of informal workers. It means many of the informal workers, they have lost their jobs in the month of April. So of those employed in the informal category, large numbers include migrants who face, like they have faced in March, April of 2020, a bleak future with job losses, loss of rented accommodation, lack of sustainable income, and savings to ensure food, transportation back to villages, or any other emergency, which includes falling victim to COVID 19. So they are not able to fight it back and they are facing lots of issues. So migration of laborers has started taking place. So given their bitter experiences last year, migrants have already begun their journeys back to the villages, which is paying exorbitant sums of their travel. And no bright prospect awaits them. They are given the state of rural distress, which is initially pushed them to seek a better future in the urban areas. And nor do they expect new job opportunities, especially under shrinking National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme allotments by the government. So last year, at least they had this option that they could have get job under Manrega, but this year, because of lesser allotment by the government or lesser job allotment by the government under Manrega, so it has started shrinking. So they do not have this new job opportunity too. So continuing exodus unofficially records figures upward of 4 lakh, that was in Western Railway between April 1 to 1 and 12, and with Central Railways sent back 4.7 lakh migrants from Maharashtra over the last few weeks. Such journeys will be recorded in the history as those of destitution, offering no prospects of a better state. With multiple issues of serious sufferings on account of COVID 19 related distress, the country has less time to discuss the fate of these unwanted migrants on their path of reverse migration or fleeing from the centers of livelihood towards dark holes of rural helplessness and the poverty. So to provide them a narrative of who these people are, we may describe them as mobile by default because they are wandering from one place to another with growing rural distress and inadequate official policies, which is failing to support the ailing rural economy. So, providing a mirror image of the previous tragedy in 2020, this unwanted trek back to where they came from provides them no future worth mentioning. The conditions faced by these workers under a curfew to lockdown status includes the immediate termination of their livelihood in terms of jobs, access to accommodation, and they have come near to insolvency. So that is the situation faced by migrants are not a matter of concerning policy making is quite apparent. There has been no attempt to have an official estimate of such flows, either incoming or reverse, nor has any thought going by official announcements been made visible to redress the miseries that await the returning migrants. Recent official announcements of free ration of 5 kg cereals to 80 crore families that is only stopped visible or that was only stopped visible so far. So rural migrants has benefited the urban economy. One can count the impact of urban centers. The flow provided a reserve army of cheap labor waiting to be hired at wages which often could dip lower than the statutory minimum, especially after meeting the demands of the mediating contractor who arranged for the migration from villages. So, with the formal organized industry employing as many as one half or more of employees with casual or informal status, it has proved rather opportune for enterprises in factories or construction sites and other labor intensive activities to make use of these migrants in their cost cutting exercises. So, on the whole, the presence of the rural migrants they benefited the urban economy by providing cheap labor to manufacturing units and cheap services to the households. So these jobs provided did not entail further obligations on the part of the employers or the state, given that the footloose migrants never had any legal status as a working population. It means they are not under the list of beneficiaries. Okay, they had not been identified. So and another problem is lack of labor safeguards. So one last question is that had there been any attempt ever to ensure some legal safeguards to these people? It means if situation has arisen that they have to migrate from urban to lower because of lack of accommodation, lack of job, lack of livelihood, then what legal help or safeguards have been provided to them? So pieces of legislations as we are available this time that do not provide any evidence of addressing the issue, especially in the current crisis. That is a pattern indicative of a minimalist state with close alliances with capital in the process. Contract Labor, that is Regulation and Abolition Act of 1970, that conferred on casual labor a legal status by providing a mechanism for registration of contractors which engages 20 or more workers, while it was never effective. Occupational Safety, Health and Working Conditions Code 2020 has replaced all such acts, seeking rather ineffectively to regulate the health and safety conditions of workers in establishments with 10 or more workers. The code has replaced 13 prevailing labor laws. So one can raise questions as to what happened to the various laws still operative. It is thus more than obvious that none of the so-called corrective measures was of any significance in relation to what the migrants have been experiencing today since weeks. So what situation they are in. Okay. So that is all about the article. Now, next article. That is about Maratha quota. Access against access. In Maratha case, Supreme Court holds fast to quota ceiling and requires special reasons to exceed it. So this article is about Marathas quota, which was given in 2016 when Marathas starting. There was a trigger point. A rape case has been a rape, because of a rape case that became a trigger point when Marathas they started demanding a reservation for Marathas in job and educational institutions. So as per their demand, they demanded somewhere 16%. I'm so sorry. They demanded somewhere 16%. Yeah, 16% reservation they wanted, but at the end, at the what's say by the effect of MG Gaikwad committee, which was set up under the then chief minister CM Fadnavis government. So under then government, MG Gaikwad committee was set up, and they decided that these Marathas, they should be given reservation, but how much should be given to them, it was left out to be decided by the government itself. So later on, what happened? It was finalized that 13% reservation would be given in the jobs, and 12% reservation would be given in the private institutions. So it has also been said that on what basis reservation should be given to them. So it was decided that reservation will be given to them on the basis of SEBC, socially and educationally backward class. So these Marathas, they were identified as SEBC, that is socially and educationally backward class. So if we see Marathas in Maharashtra, they are politically, economically, and socially and educationally, they are not backward. It means they are good in the position, but still they wanted reservation. So it was by analyzing the situation, it was given on the basis of SEBC, that is socially and educationally backward classes. Okay. So that is why it was given reservation in the educational institution and the jobs. So this time, so later on, what happened? A stay order has been imposed. Okay, because it was said that they are politically, educationally, socially, economically, they are well off. So why they want? So because of that, what happened? A stay on this order has been imposed. So this time, and it was a PIL has been filed against this, and it was said that Supreme Court need to set up a big constitutional bench to decide the matter. So Supreme Court has decided the matter and said that the reservation given to Maratha has been quashed, and if they want to get it given, so they need to give proper justification to it, on what basis they want just this reservation. So as they have said, socially and educationally backward class. So if you see 102nd Amendment Act, which has identified EWC category reservation, that is also economically weaker section. So they have identified economically weaker section on the basis of socially and educationally backward classes. So under 102 Amendment Act, it has said that center is permitted to decide which section of population is socially and educationally backward class, not the states. So on that basis, this reservation given to Marathas, that had been identified as unconstitutional. So it has been quashed by the Supreme Court. So context is that in striking down the separate reservation given to the Marathas, Maharashtra's Maratha community, Supreme Court has underscored the importance of adhering to the 50% limit of total reservation, as well as the need to justify any access by showing the existence of unexceptional circumstances. No claim for reservation found by the court. In a decision that will be quite unpalatable to mainstream parties, the court has not only found no merit in the Maratha claim to backwardness, but also said the community is adequately represented in the public services. It means they have representation in the public services. So if no surprise that Maratha quota given by the Maharashtra through a 2018 law did not survive judicial scrutiny by a constitutional bench. So 16% quota in admissions to educational institutions and jobs in the public services. Later, it was brought down to 12% in admission and 13% in jobs through 2019 amendment. Took the total reservation in the state beyond 50% ceiling imposed by the earlier verdicts. So five-judge bench has held. Acha, this 50% ceiling, I hope you guys know that under Indra Shawne case, it was said that reservation in the state should not exceed the limit of 50%. It means 50% seats will be reserved for the general category. It will be available for the general category, and remaining 50% reservation 50% seats will be reserved for different categories. So here Supreme Court has find out that 12 and 13% reservation given to the Marathas in Maharashtra, it is exceeding this 50% limit. So five-judge bench has held that that state has not shown any exceptional circumstances to justify exceeding the limit. It means state should show exceptionality to this case, on what basis they want these reservation. So Bombay High Court has upheld the validity of the Maratha reservation in the principle, but ruled that law could not have fixed the percentage above that was recommended by the State Backward Class Commission headed by N.G. Gaikwad. So court has now set aside this ruling, rejecting the High Court's reasoning that denial of backward class status to the Marathas had pushed them deeper into social and educationally backwardness, and that this constituted a special circumstance in support of their claim to separate reservation. So, second limb of the judgment may cause political concern. Court's categorical refusal to reconsider the 50% limit has set down by a verdict in Indira Shawnee 1992 case that may threaten the continuance of different kinds of reservation in the states. Court's interpretation of the 102nd Constitutional Amendment Act, by which National Commission of Backward Class was created, that has provided right fears that the national body's role and power may impact the rights of the states. So court has ruled that there will only be a single list of socially and educationally backward classes with respect to each state and union territory, which is notified by the President of India. It means only President of India can notify the list of socially and educationally backward classes, not by the state government. So and state can only make recommendations for inclusion or exclusion, with any subsequent change to be made only by the parliament. So this is the final decision of president, whom he wants to include in the socially and educationally backward class. States can recommend president that this need to be excluded or included in the list, and changes will be done or will be modified by parliament, and president is part of the parliament. Okay, so by the proceeding of parliament, these changes will occur. So several MPs, they have argued that amendment would denude the states to their power, but center had assured them that it was not so. Court has now ruled that Parliament's intention was to create a scheme to identify socially and educationally backward classes in the same manner as SCs and STs are. So President alone, to the exclusion of all other authorities, is now empowered to identify SEBC classes. Clamor for yet another constitutional amendment to undo the effect for this verdict may be in the offing. Okay, so that is all about this article. So what is the final thing? Final is that Supreme Court has squashed down the reservation given to Marathas. Okay. Now, next article is the lending hand. RBI has signaled it is aware of the burden on healthcare providers during this pandemic. So context is that Reserve Bank of India's move to step in and join the fight against second wave of pandemic through announcement of measures which is aiming at alleviating any financial constraint for these impacted, which includes healthcare sector, state governments and the public. That is a welcome and timely intervention by the RBI. So furious pace at which new COVID-19 infections and fatalities have been mounting in recent weeks, it has begun to significantly impair economic activity, just like economy appeared to have turned the corner from last year's debilitating contraction in the economy. So this year we are on the urge of it. So fresh crisis is still unfolding. Governor Shantikanta Das said in his unscheduled address, which acknowledged the challenge ahead, stressing that it is imperative to both save lives and restore livelihoods. So RBI governor proposed a calibrating response, which mooted a 50,000 crore term liquidity facility to boost credit availability for ramping up COVID-related healthcare infrastructure and services. It means 50,000 crore help or aid is being given by RBI to those who wants to step into the hospital facilities or healthcare facilities. So for improvement in the COVID-related healthcare infrastructure and services, this 50,000 rupees is being provided as an aid by the RBI. So lenders, not as an aid, but as lending amount. So lenders have been urged to expedite lending under this priority sector. So whatever lending would be taking place, it will be taking place as the priority sector. Classified scheme to entities, which includes vaccine manufacturers, hospitals, pathology labs, suppliers of oxygen, and ventilators, importers of COVID-related drugs, and logistics firms. So although Mr. Das said the scheme would also cover patients requiring treatment, he failed to spell out how those most in need of financial assistance to cover their surging medical bills could borrow the funds. In directing the flow of credit to the sector most in focus at the moment, the RBI has signaled it is cognizant of the burden on healthcare and allied providers. So, how much lending capital stressed banks would be willing to write into their COVID loan books remain to be seen. So central banks focus on small borrowers, including unorganized businesses and MSM enterprises. It means micro and small medium enterprises, and both through enhanced provision of credit via small finance banks and fresh resolution framework for existing borrowings. That is also heartening, as these economic participants were already among the worst hit during the last year's contraction. So the norms let down for resolution, including the proviso that only those borrowers who had not already availed of restructuring assistance and those loans were standard as on March 31, 2021, would be eligible for fresh resolution. That lays an onerous burden on those that RBI itself admits are the most vulnerable. So RBI governor was also unreasonably sanguine about the economic impact of the second wave, even as he granted that high frequency indicators are emitting mixed signals. So RBI's position that the dent to aggregate demand is likely to be only moderate is based on the fact that so far this year the restrictions to contain the spread of the virus have been largely localized. So, with more and more voices from the opposition to top industry groups urging a nationwide lockdown to break the chain of transmission, and Mr. Das may need to very quickly revisit the assumptions. So, what is the conclusion? Conclusion is that, or you can say as a whole, we can say that RBI has provided rupees 50,000 crores for those who for the lending. Okay, and these lending will be for the healthcare sector, whether COVID. Under this COVID-19 facilities. Or COVID related facilities will be provided, whether it is for the hospitalization, hospital beds, vaccination, or pathology labs, or etc. So, but it will be only COVID related, and it will be provided by small finance banks. Okay. Now, next article is Reform India's Fiscal Management Law for Counter Cyclical Impact. So, context is that a study of fiscal impulse imparted by fiscal policy ever since the FRBM Act came into force, it shows that came into force, and it shows that it has had a predominant pro-cyclical bias. Pro-cyclical bias, it means whatever guidelines had been framed out in the FRBM, so it will be on the line of it. Okay, so our economy, it has been found that our economy needs a new formula because India's economic has been in the turmoil. So efficacy of FRBM Act. So realms have been devoted to dispending with India's current fiscal responsibility and budget management act. So some critics has questioned that about the act's efficacy in binding our fiscal policy to achieve debt sustainability. So this laudable consideration apart, there is first principles approach to looking at fiscal discipline legislation. Discussion on public finance usually begins with listing various functions of fiscal policy, one on the principal ones being the stability objective. Motivation for this often flows from Keynes' oft repeated quote, that is, in the long term, we all are dead. Economists set themselves too easy, too useless a task if in the tempestuous season. They can only tell us that when the storm is long past, the ocean is flat again. So in the unfavorable situation, how economy will turn up. Okay, so that our economist has been suggested. So what Keynes advice on this? So Keynes essentially advocated on this: when output falls below the economy's potential, the government must add to aggregate demand and stimulate economic activity. It means when economic activity can would seem as a in the lowering position, or when what say output started falling, then what government need to do? Government need to aggregate the demand by simulating money in the market, or by simulating economic activity. So this is called counter cyclical fiscal policy. It means the way economy is doing, the actions will be against of it, or the action will be opposed of it. It means another actions will be taken. So that is called counter cyclical fiscal policy. So in that, the size of government stimulus of the to the economy runs in the opposite direction to the movement of aggregate economic output. So in the normal situation, what happens? Demand is there, supply is there, and economic activity is going on. So when economy started falling down, or output started falling down, then government should take some measures. They should do some, or they should take some measures so that aggregate demand can be improved, or can be raised, or economic activity can be improved. Okay, so this is called counter cyclical fiscal policy. One is cyclical fiscal policy. It means the cycle through which fiscal policy is going on. Okay, the framework on which it is working. That is in the normal situation. So when situation goes opposite, then counter cyclical fiscal policy has to be um, um, uh, go with that. Okay, so with this philosophy, which enjoys near unanimous approval, more government spending in the periods of inadequate demand and higher taxes in the periods of faster demand growth are usually prescribed. Scenario of inadequate economic activity is called a negative output gap, since actual output has dipped below the level of output that economy would be able to produce given its stock of resources. For this, output gap is estimated with respect to a potential level of output that can be calculated as Hodrick-Prescott filter approach. So FRBM legislation was enacted to rein in fiscal profligacy, which was more often than not driven by the political expediency, rather than any economic imperative seeking to place our sovereign debt on a path more salubrious to macroeconomic stability. So to achieve this, bounds were imposed on deficit measures, whether it is fiscal or revenue deficits, and debt were capped at certain propositions or proportions of gross domestic products. So while there has been much discussion on the impact of these bounds on debt figures of the government, it is worth inquiring whether the objective of counter-cyclicality in the fiscal policy has been achieved. Looking at the fiscal policy by means of a parameter often used by International Monetary Fund, that is called fiscal impulse. So fiscal impulse measures the change in the fiscal stance. That means this is in turn is a measure of the fiscal balance adjusted for the business cycle, and it shows whether fiscal policy is expansionary or positive fiscal stance, or contractionary, that is negative fiscal stance. So note that the fiscal balance is the global equivalent of what we call the fiscal deficit. That is a gap between expenditure and revenue of the government. It means revenue exceeds the expenditure exceeds the revenue. So IMF, unlike India, leaves out disinvestment proceeds and recovery of loans from its reckoning of revenues. So fiscal impulse indicates the change in the government's fiscal stance. Fiscal stance, that is the previous fiscal, along with the output gap, is a commentary on the conduct of the fiscal policy pursuit. Or in any year when output gap is positive, economy is considered as in the boom. And positive fiscal impulse reflects pro-cyclicality in the fiscal policy. It means more expansionary when economy is already doing well. But if the fiscal impulse is negative in the period of boom, then there is counter-cyclical trend in the fiscal policy. That is ought to be. So fiscal policy, it means what? It means this counter-cyclical fiscal policy that need to be go with. So when negative fiscal impulse is found, it means contractionary fiscal policy has found. Okay, that is negative. So in that situation, it means demand has to be increased and economic activities need to be improved. Okay, so that is what counter cyclical fiscal policy. So fiscal policy generally responds a year after an economic slowdown, when new annual budget has an opportunity to make a course correction in the light of the previous year's growth experience. So we look at the output gap of the previous fiscal coupled with current fiscal impulse, both as a percentage of potential GDP in the post FRBM period. We have data for 15 complete fiscal years, like since FRBM Act came in. Negative fiscal impulse implies a contractionary fiscal policy, which, when coexisting with the negative output gap, implies pro cyclical fiscal conduct. And only on 4 occasions has the fiscal policy been counter cyclical since 2004 5. Fiscal policy could not be counter cyclical in more than 70% of the time that FRBM Act has been in operation. Since 2016-17, expenditure financed through extra budgetary resources also contributed to the fiscal stimulus. Accounting for this does not alter our findings much. It just adds one more episode of counter cyclical fiscal policy. It is notable that placing the limit on fiscal deficit as a share of GDP ipso facto biases the fiscal policy towards pro-cyclicality, and it allows a larger absolute fiscal deficit in case of a higher GDP. So this is a ripe area of reform if and when we legislate a new debt deficit law. So there are ways to enable counter-cyclicality into a debt law. While retaining the numerical bounds on our fiscal deficit, or leeway can be granted to achieve the targeted average over a couple of years instead of each year individually. Alternatively, some provisions can be made to modulate growth of expenditure, like constituent components coupled with their multiplier values, or cumulatively close the economy's output gap. So there are constraints in being able to implement a counter-cyclical fiscal policy when one doesn't have a grip on the GDP figure of the fiscal year ahead. And if we had estimated, techniques to calculate the output gap are very sensitive to the precision of these estimates. Also, counter-cyclical fiscal intervention must be pursued in consonance with ensured debt sustainability. And these issues aside, that there is no countervailing thought to be imperative or of baking the counter-cyclicality of fiscal policy into our debt deficit law. Okay, so in this situation, when negative fiscal policy is being found, or contractionary fiscal policy has been found, so in this situation, what government needs to do? Government needs to come up with the counter cyclical fiscal policy, so that demand can be improved, and economic, and this can be done by economic stimulus. It means government need to improve its economic activities in the region. Okay, then only counter cyclical policy can be worked. So these are all about the day, all such important, as I've said in the beginning, that this week's The Hindu had no good articles or editorials, and I have taken out all such editorials from different newspapers for the discussion. So these are all for the day. I hope these are helpful for you, and you can read these, you can go through the session or the lecture, or any doubt comes, then we can discuss in the next session. So thank you so much. Have a nice day. Have a nice Sunday or nice weekend, and take care of yourself away from public or public places, or and keep distancing, or follow social distancing and all such public behavior norms. So thank you so much. Have a nice day. Have a nice Sunday. Bye-bye.